Hey everyone, welcome to another YouTube painting process video. Now if you want to skip this introduction and go directly to the painting process video, you can go through this timestamp here. But I just want to preface before going into it that this will be a video response to a Joe Rogan podcast clip where he talks about how video games can be very bad and such, and I wanted to give my input on it. So before I start, I want to show a very short clip of it. Of course, you can go to the timestamp if you want.
And video games are a real problem. They're a real problem. You know why? Because they're fucking fun.
Addictive.
And you don't, I have a real problem with them. And you do them and they're real exciting, but you don't get anywhere.
Right.
It's like you could do like martial arts, right? You could learn jujitsu. You get obsessed by jujitsu, and then 3 years later, you're like an elite jujitsu athlete. You're entering in competitions. You're a purple belt.
You're moving up.
Yeah, you're doing well. Right. You're thinking like, I might be able to open my own school one day.
You got confidence.
Yeah, if I have 100 students and those 100 students are paying me X amount of dollars per month, I can make a living.
In a previous iteration of this video, I was talking about another topic, but because this clip kind of went viral, I wanted to give my own input. Now, why am I adamant in making this and releasing it on a Monday, which is of course very unusual for me? It's because, if you haven't noticed from my YouTube channel, I am an avid video gamer, which you might have clued in if you are watching this video, as this character is from Final Fantasy XIV. But if you're not too aware of my personal life as well, I am an avid martial artist. I've been doing Muay Thai for around 7 years, and I've also started to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have done competition with Muay Thai, so I feel like, given the background of my skill sets and hobbies, that I can give a hopefully objective view when it comes to this topic. So I want to start off by saying that a lot of people are being really harsh on Joe Rogan, whether because it's a misunderstanding based on how people are clipping his actual podcast, or if you have legitimate arguments against what he's saying. But in general, I do think he has a point. I used to, in my high school days, play up to 12 hours to 14 hours of World of Warcraft every single day. Joe is right in the sense that what came out of that was basically nothing. Nobody will ever care about what my accomplishments, quote unquote, in World of Warcraft is. And to be honest, it really hasn't given me any type of skills whatsoever. There are some arguments where you could say video games train your hand-eye coordination and your reaction times, but in general that depends entirely on what type of game you're playing and at what level. I might have been a World of Warcraft addict, but I wasn't necessarily one of the world class type of player. I was just very addicted. I wasn't really good at the game, so to speak, especially when we're talking about relative to actual professional gamers. So if I could go back in time and tell my younger self to do something more productive, I would absolutely do so, and it was an absolutely big waste of time. So does that mean that I would tell my younger self to just go into martial arts earlier, and that martial arts would have been a better use of time? Maybe not, and I'll tell you why. So barring the physical advantages of learning martial arts or any type of other sport, the chance of you becoming a really high-level competitor or even an instructor when it comes to martial arts is actually not as high as Joe Rogan makes it out to be. As with video games as well, a big part of it is whether you have the drive and even the talent when it comes to that stuff. A good example is just hearing stories about a UFC fighter, Francis Ngannou. If you're not too familiar with his story, he is a very high level elite UFC heavyweight. And what makes his story interesting is the fact that he really didn't have many years to his name in training before he fought for the UFC belt, which he lost, by the way, but still, it was very impressive given he had around, like, what was it, 4 to 5 years of training. So yes, people like him who are physically talented and motivated to go into martial arts could theoretically become, let's say, a UFC elite. But for every success story when it comes to that sort of thing, you have a multitude of people, including me, who aren't going to even sniff at the UFC job line. So that would mean that martial arts for me and other people would just be a waste of time as well. Because ultimately, it's just for fun. Now, of course, I will always put martial arts in a better hobby type of category because it gives you the discipline and the physical prowess that video game probably wouldn't. But I do find Joe Rogan's argument where he says you could learn jiu-jitsu for 3 years and you could potentially become an instructor or compete. I don't think that is going to be the case for most people. And if you could make that argument, then I could say that as you play Fortnite for 3 years, then you might have the chance of becoming a Fortnite tournament player or a coach. Both are kind of unrealistic, and it comes down to, again, whether you are talented in the specific hobby or if you are driven enough in order to reach that point. I don't go into MMA thinking I have a chance at the UFC. Similarly, you shouldn't really think that just by playing Fortnite or StarCraft or something that you will eventually become a pro. Ultimately, all of this can just be fun hobbies for you, and that's completely fine. There is nothing wrong with just having fun. It's just if you ever get to the point where you were like me and I was obsessed with World of Warcraft and spending most of my day playing it, then yes, it can be very detrimental. You are allowed to have fun, and things shouldn't always come down to whether it becomes a career or not. If it just so happens that you are amazing at something, then you can pursue it further, but otherwise just relax and don't worry too much about whether what you're doing is going to be this epic journey for 20 years or not. Life is too short to be too stressed about the far end implications of what every single action you're doing is going to result in. And I'm using martial arts and video games as example. You can use whatever hobby you want. So tennis and, I don't know, basketball. Just whatever that makes you feel better. Just go with it. It's fun. We're not expecting everyone to go to the NBA. Just understand that sometimes, no matter what you're doing, you should do it in moderation. So now that I kind of put forth my argument here, why does this really matter, especially when it comes to art? Since, of course, this is an artist channel. Well, my friends, it's because this is the story of many professional artists. I'm sure throughout this video, if you're an artist, you would have suspected that I'll be linking towards it, since this sort of thing would sound very familiar with you if you are into art. A big part of how I became a professional artist is the fact that I started art as a hobby. And it was something for fun. I was just surfing forums, anime forums and that sort of thing, just to get feedback and show off my chops. But it turns out that I saw potential in art, despite many people, family and friends, who told me that art has no future and that it should be left for just to have fun. I would suspect a lot of artists would have this experience as well, and feel free to comment down below if you have a story similar to mine. But it goes to show that I do understand Joe Rogan's point of view, where there are some hobbies which can translate into a living as you get better at something. But it doesn't mean that everyone will be able to reach that point, especially if, let's say, you're not too driven in that sort of hobby. You can only go so far if you don't put in the hours. For me, as someone who isn't very physically talented, it is actually just as unrealistic of Joe Rogan to say you can become a professional martial artist in 3 years as were for me to say you can become a professional video game player at 3 years or become an artist at 3 years. You don't really know what will happen. You can only do what you like to do and do it long enough, and eventually maybe something will come out of it. All in all, you wouldn't know until you put the time and you discover yourself. It's why I always advocate for people to try out all different things, just a bunch of hobbies, just see what you like and perhaps something will click. I will say that I echo Joe Rogan's sentiments in that video games can be very addictive because they're so fun right off the bat. They're all designed to hook you, and you can fall into the trap of just being too far into video games like I did. And thankfully I took that sort of motivation in video games towards my arts and my martial arts. Everyone needs an outlet when it comes to everyday life. And if you find yourself just playing video games for the sake of playing video games, then perhaps you can try out other hobbies just to see if you like something better, which I did eventually, where I started to pick up a pen and paper, and the rest is history. Now, as a final point, it is important for me to distinguish the skill floors with everything I've talked about. So what I mean by this is there are certain activities which has a lower barrier of skill than other things. And it might be what Joe Rogan was trying to argue for, but didn't really articulate entirely. Video games are something that has a very low barrier of entry, a very low skill floor. Now, of course, certain video games are a bit more skillful than others, like, let's say, StarCraft versus something like Cooking Mama. But in general, it's going to be a lot easier to get into than something like martial arts or visual arts. Hence why video games can be very fun and addicting, because it's something that most likely you can just pick up immediately and get into very quickly as compared to another activity. This is an important point to make because I feel a lot of beginner artists end up quitting because they think it's very daunting to rise up to the skills required to start drawing what you like. So my advice when it comes to that is, if you are going to get into art, that you enjoy the journey rather than the destination. This goes back to the idea of fun. You're probably going to be spending more time on something that is fun than something that is not. If you're not going to enjoy drawing or any other activity while you are a beginner, you're probably going to not enjoy it when you get really good. It's just that video games are generally almost always fun, whereas other activities like basketball or tennis or martial arts might not be fun for you. So that's where video games kind of catches people off guard with how much time they spend on them. But it doesn't mean that video games are inherently bad for you. It just means that you should understand what its role is and whether it is going to be an important part of your life or not. That sort of mentality could be used for anything, and it's not just for video games. And like I said before, don't be too caught up with whether something is going to have a very long-term impact or not. That's where I disagree with Joe Rogan, where he puts more value in martial arts than video games, when in reality I would say that, for me at least, for my own experiences, martial arts was just a fun thing and video games are just a fun thing. The chances of me making a living off of martial arts, based on my own assessment, is going to be just as low as me being a Fortnite professional. And really, given that I am painting someone from a video game, that you might have figured out that video games are a big part of my life, and that I did end up using its influence into my arts, which, of course, productive by Joe's definition. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a very long-winded one, but I wanted to give my 2 cents, given that I'm doing basically everything that Joe Rogan was talking about. Don't be too caught up with hating on him just because he put down his argument. He does have valid points. Think about the journey and not the destination. Whether it be video games, martial arts, art, or any other type of activity. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.